but I needed to collaborate with somebody on it because doing sequential art, for a comic book, is a real specialty, and I'll collaborate with an artist who'll do the pencils and lay the story out for me. Then I'll finish it. I'll script it. He do the layout, and I'll do the finished art. So it's some local guy I've talked to who I'll do this with.
So you do a lot of collaborating, actually. Then,
It's fun to collaborate. It's fun. You evolve ideas a lot faster and better, bouncing things back and forth with people. So it's fun.
Now, I think I did read also about calendar and trading cards. And, your paintings appear on.
The trading cards were a spin-off of a book I did called Firebrands, which was a pictorial history of the heroines of science fiction and fantasy. A friend of mine, Pam Sargent, wrote the text for it because she's a science fiction author, and she's also written a lot about women in science fiction, so she was perfect. I looked up about 100-odd different characters going back to the late 19th century up to the present, mainly to show that the stereotype of the woman in science fiction hasn't always been this little blank-eyed, chinless girl wrapped around the ankles as a barbarian. That there really have been a lot of heroic women in science fiction, and all through history. So that's what the point of the book was that. And then I forget how the trading card thing came about. I think I might have been contacted about it, or I contacted somebody. I can't recall. But since there were so many paintings in the book, it was just natural for the number they needed for trading cards. There's 100 paintings in the book. I think 90 was the number of cards. So I said, sure. It's it was kind of cool to have trading cards out.
Sure.
And it was extra money too. It doesn't hurt.
Well, you mentioned women as characters. What about women authors? Certainly among the authors of the past.
There are plenty.
Other than Mary Shelley, whose name came up in a list of women authors of long ago, were there other women who were writing fantasy, science?
More than most people think, and some of whose names I can't even think of. Even back in the 19th century, late 19th century, there were some space travel novels written by women. There weren't that many women science fiction authors really into the last few decades. But some of those classic science fiction was written by people, Anne McCaffrey, Lee Brackett, for example. I think Lee Brackett got a lot of her books published mainly because her name was kind of androgynous, and the readers didn't know that they were reading these fabulous adventure stories written by a woman. And I think a lot of women science fiction authors, say in the 30s and 40s, wrote either with an initials in their name, or they had an ambiguous first name like Lee Brackett did. But they were some of the most popular authors nevertheless. And of course now that in the 70s and 80s and 90s, of course, there was just so many women authors they're hard to even name. Actually, Lois Bujold, I think, has tied Robert Heinlein for the number of Hugo Awards, which is the science fiction Oscar. So I think that she certainly showed that women can write as good as the male science fiction authors.
Incidentally, we should mention your Hugo.
Oh, please do.
It was for?
The Art of Chesley Bonestell, which is a big picture book about the artist who really inspired me to be an astronomical painter and specialized in doing space art. And he worked mostly in the 1950s, actually from the 40s up until he died, but his sort of peak period was in the 1950s. His work just inspired a whole generation of artists and scientists and astronomers and astronauts. One of his most famous paintings everyone has seen has been called the painting that launched 1,000 careers. And so I've always admired his work. And I had an opportunity to have access to literally an archive of his materials. In fact, it's all in the next room now. I sort of inherited it all.
How wonderful.
And so just had to do a book. So I worked with a friend of mine who didn't do any of the writing. He helped get the access to this stuff. And came with this big coffee table book about Chesley Bonestell, and sold like hotcakes and got the Hugo Award.
That's wonderful. Well, I know that some of your books also have been included in book club selections, and then you have other awards as well for your work. You want to tell us a little about that?
Well, that series got the one I think pleases me even more than the Hugo Award. The American Institute of Physics gave it their award of excellence in science last year, and I'm extremely pleased about that because that's a very prestigious award for children's science books. So I'm very happy about that. So it's also got me a nice commemorative chair and a trip to Wisconsin and everything. So all I'm trying to do now is think, okay, great, what can I do next so I can get another one. And I think the same thing about the Hugo. It sets a standard for me.
Sure.
And which may be higher than I want it to be.
Do you have any preference as far as illustration versus writing, or do they go hand in hand? Or?
I enjoy both equally.
Yeah.
I mean, partly because I'm illustrating my own stuff for the most part.
Sure. But
I like both. It's great because I can sit and work on the illustrations until I get tired of it. I can swing around on my chair and then write until I'm tired of it. And I just do back and forth. Sometimes I'll write something specifically because I want to do a picture for it. Or sometimes I'll do a picture and I just want to write something to go with it. So they get kind of hand in hand.
Yeah. I want to ask you also about dealing with the current findings in space. If you are going to illustrate those things which are happening today and are so incredibly overwhelming in terms of bringing knowledge to us, actual knowledge to us, do you take it a step further? Can you go take what the scientific findings are, what NASA comes back with, and what specifics are being filmed by all the robots and so forth, and do something beyond that as an artist?
Well, there's a couple of answers to that question. If I'm doing work like for these space books, like for the Grand Tour or for the Worlds Beyond series, there's a limit to how far I can invent. NASA, for example, has very few pictures of anything on the ground. A few things around Mars, some things on the moon. Every place else is seen from above. It's like aerial photographs.
Sure.
So I have to take these pictures where we're looking straight down on things. Think, well, what would this look like if you're actually standing there and looking? And that's what it takes. It takes a lot of research, and a lot of invention. But there's a limit to what I can make up, because I can't go beyond what would be reasonably scientifically correct. Even though the scene I'm showing might be totally invented out of whole cloth. I mean, I don't know if those mountains are really there, or those craters, or even those specific rocks. But it wouldn't be something you wouldn't see in this place. So if I'm doing things like that, I'd be very careful. If you're doing something more science fictional, then of course I can just take the science and extrapolate all I want.
Yes.
And just do whatever I like, as long as, once again, I'm not doing something that's totally silly, then I slop over into fantasy. So there's two parts to your answer to your question. If I'm doing the science books, I can't invent too much. If I'm doing more science fiction, then I'm a lot freer to, invent.
What are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on a history of fireworks for a British publisher. Let me think. There's a lot of things. History of fireworks is one.
What are you doing with the history of fireworks? I mean, how does that relate to?
I like fireworks. I love fireworks. And it can give me an excuse to, visit fireworks plants and talk to people, blow things up. I mean, of course. So it just didn't dawn on me to write a book about it recently. So it'd be a picture book